College football nerds here talking Iron Bowl. We are as surprised as you, but there's not a lot going on this week that we could squeeze in and get some eyeballs on. So we're talking Iron Bowl. We want you to like and subscribe and get into this conversation with us in the comments. Let us know who's going to win this game. If you want to maybe tell a joke or two about Auburn losing to New Mexico State, that's okay. They earned it. Even if you're an Auburn fan, you can laugh at that a little bit. Okay, Josh, this game is interesting to me in a way that I didn't think it would be this time of year, because if you talked to me a month ago or maybe after 3 or 4 weeks into the season, I would say, Alabama fans wouldn't be super engaged at this point to the level that they are, because they wouldn't have SEC West belt already hanging on the wall and the attempt or the opportunity to beat Georgia maybe and go to the playoffs. But that's where we are, and I think it speaks a lot to the turnaround that they've done offensively and just improving as a team. But I also think there's an opportunity here to discuss what's going on with Auburn and how they match up against Alabama, and maybe if they were looking ahead and spent last week prepping for Alabama instead of looking at New Mexico State. So let's get this started a little bit in talking about how Alabama, not just early in the year, but for the last 2 years under Bill O'Brien and a defensive coordinator that shall remain nameless, Alabama wasn't vintage Alabama. They weren't blowing teams out. They weren't taking care of business. And they started this season a little bit the same, and I think it was a different problem than it was with coordinators. It was more just personnel getting used to new coordinators. But Josh, now it feels like Alabama is doing the one thing that they have done in the past that signals that they are the Alabama of old, which maybe they're not, but they have to at least do this, and that's take care of business against lesser opponents. As it looks right now, Auburn might be another one of those lesser opponents, but let's just get started, Josh, with Alabama looking a little bit different the second half of the season.
Yeah, and we did a video where we recapped last week, and we had an interesting discussion, I think, on really the resume comparisons between Oregon and Alabama. So if you want to hear that at length, then go to that video. And again, if you like our stuff, like and subscribe, hit the notification bell. Why? Because we do content like that. And if you're not watching it, then you're missing out, because we can't repeat everything in every video. And we do a lot of different things in a lot of different areas. But one of the things we discussed is teams that are elite teams, playoff caliber teams, are only ever threatened by teams in the top 65 of college football. 133 teams, it's roughly the top half of college football is what I'm saying. And if you look at even the biggest upsets, right, like Iowa State over Oklahoma State was probably the biggest. That was a team with a terrible record in the Big 12, and that was actually still a team can't recall, they were either low 70s, but I believe they were actually upper 50s in the overall rankings, because the vast majority of college football isn't really that competitive, and half of college football is G5 teams that by and large can't really win many games in a major conference. Maybe knock on wood, given current circumstances here, which we'll talk on in a minute. But Alabama's week in and week out performance was that they were just surviving and advancing. And you've got to give them some credit, because of the schedule leading into this past week, they had played 10 games, and 8 of the 10 games were teams in that top 65. There really were not many low-level, throwaway, trash games. Even Mississippi State was a team in the top 60, and they were really the worst. And that's FPI, which love them or hate them, and I'm not relying on them for particular rankings. You can go look at our power ratings, look at our model, which I'll say has beaten FBI this year pretty consistently against the spread. But third-party objective way to look at what is a top half team, a rough metric we're talking about. But they were struggling to dominate teams. And, those 8 games, they had 5 of the 8 they won by 2 touchdowns or more. I'll note, Oregon only actually has 2 wins of 2 touchdowns or more against a top 65 team. Just saying. Most of their schedule was quite bad. So they were doing well, but not overwhelmingly well. And particularly on the offensive side of the ball, they'd struggled a little bit. The Tennessee game, they win 34-20, came alive in the second half, had a terrible first half. Arkansas, who's not a very good team, is still a major blemish at 24-21. That's a game they should have been able to win handily. Obviously, the South Florida game was a pretty terrible game, but obviously also a weird situation. Milroe didn't play. driving rain, rain delay, etc. But the last couple weeks, the Kentucky game and the Chattanooga game, the offense just ran at a completely different level. And it really is, since the second half of the Tennessee game, through the LSU game, through the Kentucky game, through the Chattanooga game, they are operating in a way they simply could not do. And it really starts with the quarterback position. Milroe has a feel for that position he simply did not have. We had been repeatedly critical of the fact that their offensive line was being maligned for giving up sacks. And I would often note, a lot of times he was drifting too far deep in the pocket where the left tackle would route. There were some really high-level speed rushers they were playing. They'd route them deep, 8 yards deep, 9 yards deep, and Milroe would just drift back all the way to where he would still take a sack because it's all about making an arc with a speed rusher. You're trying to route them around. Well, if you're too far back in the pocket, that wraps around to you. Milroe was a first-time starter, and he's improved. In the last few weeks, there was a big play in either the Kentucky or the Chattanooga game, I believe it was the Chattanooga game actually, where he stepped up with some outside pressure, just took a step or two forward, ended up a completely clean pocket, stepped into the throw, made a throw downfield. And the average person watching that probably doesn't even notice that it happens. But that's a play that was a strip fumble early in the Tennessee game where he drifted too far back that becomes a big play now, and it is simply him gaining pocket awareness from gaining maturity, gaining an understanding of the offense. His intermediate throws have gained a lot of more consistency. I think Reese is a play caller. Either they've changed what they're doing offensively, and I don't know if it's a Saban mandate, a Reese mandate. I've heard rumors that what they've really started doing is running more of the Tommy Reese offense and less of the Alabama offense. Don't know whether that's true or not, but maybe that's the way you want to think about it. There's a lot more design quarterback runs, which is something Reese used to do a lot at Notre Dame. Buckner at one point was almost the leading rusher when he was starting. And that, as well as how much they're moving the pocket, the way that they're basically not doing as much as a read-based pro-style offense and more predicated on using the threat of the quarterback run to gain a numbers advantage. Because, again, the moment somebody spies the quarterback or plays edge contain, that takes somebody out of pass defense, and then that lets you try to get the run because those guys, and if you're spying, you're not blitzing, so running becomes easier. You're playing on your heels. And then you throw play action off it, where you play levels concepts, simpler concepts, and Milroe's gotten a lot better at those concepts. What I find interesting is, even I watched sort of the highlights of it, even the backup quarterback Simpson, the guy that had struggled in the South Florida game, to me looks far more comfortable and effective in that offense now than he did early in the year in backup time. So it's not just Milroe. The whole offense has gotten more effective, probably due to the offensive line. And you end up with an Alabama team that it was always my prediction, right? That the best Alabama offense was going to come with some sort of slight drop-off in certain metrics from a passing standpoint. And I said that particularly after Alabama threw for 13.7 yards per attempt with Milroe against Mississippi State. We were previewing the Texas A&M game, and I said, look, they're going to be better with less yards per attempt, but a more consistent offense around it. The LSU game, Milroe was 9.5 yards per attempt. He was actually close with 9.4 to his season low in yards per attempt against LSU. Kentucky, 10.6 yards per attempt, is less than he had against Ole Miss in a game they only scored 24. The difference is defenses are not completely just playing absolute, just total aggression, all-out blitz. And basically before they were saying, we're going to bring everybody we can against the line of scrimmage, and we're either going to sack Milroe or we're going to let him throw deep. And most of the time, they would get there, and he would scramble or take a sack, none of which shows up in the passing numbers. The running game was gone. Now teams are actually playing Alabama much more straight up. And what's happened is Milroe has more or less maintained his passing statistics, despite facing a much more coverage-oriented defense. And everything else in that offense has improved as a result. The running game is far more effective. The consistency in the offense is far more effective because they're not just getting 40 yards on a bomb, they're getting 4 10-yard plays. And the number of sacks and negative plays, which were going against the rushing stats, have dropped dramatically. So all those things have turned Alabama from a team that was a lot of potential and very boom and bust to a tremendously more well-rounded offense. And frankly, Milroe took a step forward that people are going to say that's just what happens with a new quarterback. He took a step forward guys rarely take within the same year. And you do sometimes see it with first-time starters. J.T. Barrett in 2014 lost them. The Virginia Tech game looked terrible early in the year, and he was one of the most efficient passers in the country to end the year pre-injury. And Milroe has had that kind of a progression. He's just simply a different quarterback. He took steps forward, and if you're an Alabama fan, you ought to appreciate it because Kyle McCord was a better quarterback week 2 than Milroe. He simply was. I think Milroe is a better quarterback right now than McCord, and I'm not even sure that it's actually even that close. And so there were a lot of other teams that had other first-year starters that have been trying to get him to improve, and Alabama's simply taken a lot of steps forward other teams haven't, and it's made them look like a completely different team to end the year.
Auburn, to me, has been a lot of the same team throughout the year, and the only real blip on that is the just absolute beatdown on Arkansas, which might lend some credence to the idea that Auburn spent this whole previous week planning for Bama and not planning for New Mexico State, and it bit them. Because if you're the type of team that can beat Arkansas that bad, either Arkansas has completely given up, or you should be able to beat New Mexico State, with a normal week of prep. The problem with Auburn for me in this game is the matchups are just terrible because, I do think that Thorne is a better runner than people realize and will probably extend some drives against Alabama because defensively they've shown they're susceptible to that a little bit, but they're not a good passing team. And this secondary is so good that they're going to not have to dedicate, they can play single high all day if they wanted to. They don't have to dedicate extra guys for what Auburn's going to bring to the table in the passing game. And the real concern for me, Josh, is we've seen games like last week against New Mexico State where, okay, the passing game breaks down, right? You should be able to bully a G5 team and just run the ball with Hunter and run your way out of the trouble. And they weren't able to do that, which concerns me given that for all the talk, and that this has been a discussion this year about Alabama's first half offensive deficiencies, and this second half, where their offense is going, that defense is elite no matter how you look at it. And Josh, even if Alabama's offense goes back to that boom or bust thing that we saw previously in the year, they're still going to back their way into 24 points, and I'm not sure Auburn breaks 10.
I think that's sort of the gist of it. People wonder why Auburn can have a close game against Georgia and then get blown out by New Mexico State. There's a lot of factors here, which I'll try to sort of walk through a little bit. The first is that Auburn found something with Peyton Thorne they weren't probably even fully expecting, which is that Peyton Thorne is a very effective runner. He had a couple big edge runs on Georgia that really gave them unrealistic amounts of production. I almost want to say, they didn't really move the ball very well on Georgia, except in a couple spurts where they got them on the edges, and they attacked them that way over and over for a couple drives. Georgia did some things to adjust. The Auburn offense kind of stopped functioning, and it was a game where it felt like Auburn could win if they could keep moving the ball, but they couldn't. The Arkansas game in particular is always interesting because Arkansas runs a 3-3-5. They tend to have light fronts, and if teams can run the ball effectively, it's possible to kind of run over Arkansas, and it just sort of steamrolls until it becomes overwhelming. In that game, too, Peyton Thorne had 88 yards rushing, 7.3 yards per attempt, had a touchdown. So they've constantly been leaning on Thorne in that zone read game to run him, which is weird because I don't think he was brought in to do that. You also have Robbie Ashford on the roster, but Thorne is enough of a threat to throw the ball, and he was fairly effective. 3 touchdowns, only 8.2 yards per attempt, only 12 of 20 passing, but enough in the Arkansas game to keep him honest. The problem with Ashford is he's just not a good enough passer to make teams play him honestly, which kind of changes the dynamic. The problem, as you said, is matchups. So Georgia has some deficiencies on the edge. There's really been a clear picture over the course of the year that if there's a chink in Georgia's armor, it's that the edge talent isn't quite what they're used to, and particularly from an athleticism standpoint, they've struggled a little bit to run with teams actually sideline to sideline from the center of that defense. If you can attack them on the edges in the run game, they're great defensive linemen in the interior. Auburn in that game could not run between the tackles at all. They just absolutely couldn't do anything really. Much of anything between the tackles. The success all came on the edges where they would just do enough to keep Georgia honest and they would pop one off tackle. But to your point, it feels like it's a bit of a one-trick pony. And Alabama in particular has probably the best edge talent of any team in the country. Their inside linebackers are extremely athletic. I don't know if Lawson will play or not, but regardless, they're very, very good. And I don't think you're going to get the edge on Turner and Braswell with any frequency. I certainly don't think Peyton Thorne is going to scare Alabama in the way that they could almost anybody else with him as a runner, because Alabama has outside linebackers that can actually run him down, which Georgia did not do, didn't have. Certainly, Arkansas didn't really have that as kind of guys either. The other aspect to it I want to touch on briefly is the New Mexico State game to put it in some context, because I want to slow the roll a little bit on the overreaction as that being the absolute worst loss ever. In our power rating, Auburn is currently ranked 53rd. New Mexico State is actually ranked 61st. And to put that in perspective, Northwestern is 62nd. Florida is actually 64th. Rutgers is 66th. As far as our power rating is concerned, Auburn lost 31-10 to a team that is better than Florida. Looked at F+, and this was sort of an interesting perspective to me to compare the Louisiana Monroe infamous Pearl Harbor references from Nick Saban to what just happened in the New Mexico State game. Louisiana Monroe in 2007 was the 94th ranked team in F+. F+ is in a combination of FEI and SP+. You go to bcftoys.com. Brian Fermo puts that out for free. It's a great website if you've never used it. But they were the 94th best team in the country. That's a pretty objectively bad team. Their overall rating was negative 0.95, for whatever that's worth. New Mexico State isn't nearly that bad. Now, they're 79th, which is not that far from 94th, but still 25 points higher. But the point I'll make is their rating is negative 0.29 versus negative 0.94. Basically, Louisiana Monroe is like a 2-tier worse team than what New Mexico State is this year. This year, Mississippi State, for reference, is 74th in F+, and New Mexico State is 79th. So as far as F+ is concerned, basically Auburn lost 31-10 to Mississippi State. I believe New Mexico State is something like 14-4 in the last games, and maybe 15-4 now with the Auburn game. They simply are not the same team they were 3 years ago when they were atrocious. They and New Mexico were some of the worst teams in the country. I think Alabama played them, trying to remember, around 5 years ago, if my memory serves. Maybe I'm totally off, but I think that's right. But they're just absolutely not the same team they were then. They're a legitimate football team now. They are a bad football team by P5 standards, but they are merely bad. They are not atrocious. It's not shocking they could beat a football team that's struggling. Certainly not shocking they could beat a football team in Auburn that is both not very good, probably not at all motivated, and may well not have fully prepared for New Mexico State looking ahead to Alabama. So to put that all together, I agree with you. There's matchup issues. But I also want to take a bit of a step back from overreacting, because New Mexico State is not an FCS team. It's not even really that bad of a team. It's one of the better G5 teams around the country. And so, if you were to view this game as looking at F+, right, the teams around them, Boston College, Pittsburgh, Baylor, Arizona State, Houston, if it had been 31-10 to a team with that name, would you view it differently? Cincinnati's sitting there at 75th for perspective. And so I do think there's a little bit of an overreaction, probably from Auburn fans and Alabama fans both. Definitely a bad mark for Auburn, but also not the kind of catastrophic one you'd get. And that's why the 14.5-point spread, I think, is kind of interesting, because it's not catastrophically bad. It's a team that lost 21 in New Mexico State, and they don't think Alabama will beat them by that much. I actually kind of find the spread lower than expected. I'm not sure. I think you may actually have the different perspective, Daniel.
Yeah, I think one point, though, before we move on from the New Mexico State game, I think anybody that loses 31-10 to Mississippi State or Baylor is terrible, too. I think it's a terrible loss. I think it's one of the worst losses ever in terms of, okay, it's a G5 team. It's a good G5 team. If you lose to them, it's not the end of the world. The fact that you were bullied by them. Most of the time when we see an SEC team or a Power 5 team get upset by a G5 team where they were a 3-touchdown favorite, it's like things don't go well, and then the last second play and you lose. Auburn was straight up dominated in this game, and that's where I think the only explanation is that they were planning ahead, because I don't think Auburn, to the point that you're kind of getting at, I don't think Auburn is that bad. And I think the spread might reflect that a little bit. But I also think it reflects the fact that, I think that there is still some lingering concern about the Alabama offense that it might have just quote unquote hit its stride because it faced a Kentucky team that was a poor matchup and it faced an LSU defense that is objectively bad. And that against a decent defense, they are going to run into some of the scaling issues where they have 3 and outs and where they have ugly plays and that ruin drives. And I think that's where Vegas might say it's going to be hard to get more than a couple of touchdowns up on Auburn. And that, I think, is a valid thought. The problem for me is I could see some of those old things sneaking back into this Alabama offense and it not mattering because Auburn doesn't cross the 50. Now, that may not happen. Like, Auburn might score some points, but I think that Auburn's going to give Alabama the ball so much that, unlike Texas, who could take advantage of it, even if Alabama has, some turnovers or some slow starts, they could still get well into the 30s into this game, even if they're not firing on all cylinders.
Yeah, and do you mind right now if we go ahead and transition to the model? Because I think it starts to sort of...
No, I think it's a good time for that.
Yeah, really fleshes this point out. The model in this game has it Alabama 34, Auburn 15. Yards per play, 6.4 for Alabama, 4.3 for Auburn. So it's about a 50% differential there. And just across the board, right? 9.6 yards per attempt, 4.5 yards per carry. That's a very effective passing game. And an effective run game, maybe not a dominant one. And then Auburn at 5 yards an attempt is just anemic. To go with a run game at 4 yards a carry that's doing just okay, but not much more than that. And as you'd guess, Alabama really across the board has advantages. But the biggest things there really is the Alabama's pass defense versus Auburn's pass offense is just a total mismatch. And the fact that Alabama's rushing defense has an advantage, and note it's only actually a 7-point advantage, which speaks to the fact that Auburn does have a good run game this year, a legitimately good one. But Alabama has enough of an advantage to keep Auburn in check from being able to run it decently well. And they don't have a counterpunch, which means that Auburn isn't really projected to score. But what I do find interesting there is this is about a 19-point spread as far as our model is concerned, 15-34. And that is higher than Vegas' spread. And what's notable there, too, is our model, as we've said, is probably underrating Alabama right now, given current trajectories and the way things are going. I feel pretty comfortable in saying that. Alabama in our total overall power rating is only ranked 11th between Florida State and Kansas State, who are 10th and 12th. And the reason for that is our model weights every game equally, rates every possession equally. And Alabama's had some absolute clunkers. The Arkansas game was mostly a clunker. First half of the Tennessee game. Certainly the South Florida game was a clunker offensively, though people also sort of throw away the fact that, yes, it makes you look worse offensively, but that was also a game where you were totally dominant defensively, which helps you on the other side of the coin. But I think Alabama is better than the 11th best team in the country right now. I think they're playing at a much higher level than that in the last 3 or 4 weeks. Subjectively, eye test perspective, there were a lot of things they were doing wrong that I would talk about and say, look, I know their passing stats are crazy, but they just, it to me did not really reflect what they were able to do as an offense. A lot of those things have really turned around. And again, they were second to last in the country in sacks allowed. It's not a huge improvement, but they're all the way up to 120th. And the thing I'll note from that, that doesn't sound like that much, but the gap from was 53 sacks by Old Dominion is now second to last, 38 for Alabama. And so just moving up that far was a substantial change in where Alabama is at from a sacks allowed perspective. And I can actually even sort that, so I can tell you sacks allowed per game in the month of November for Alabama, they're 19th. They're averaging 1 a game. They've only had 3 sacks in the last 3 games. And this was a team that was averaging almost 5 sacks a game. So it's just a different football team. It's a team that's improved. Our model doesn't necessarily see that to the extent it should. And yet this still has this a 19-point game with only a 14.5-point spread. So I think that says a lot about how much Vegas thinks Auburn's going to be motivated in this game. Says a lot about the fact that I do think there's probably a very true reality that Auburn probably was preparing in advance for Alabama. That does not mean that they necessarily were sitting there watching Alabama tape, but what it often does mean is that you install your anti-Alabama game plan a week early, you rep that, you call it the New Mexico State game plan, but you're really prepping for Alabama, and you don't tell the players that. And let me be clear, even Alabama does that. And I've heard from people, coaches, all throughout the SEC, the major programs. Georgia does it, Alabama does it. The coaches tell you to focus week to week. They tell the fans to focus week to week. There are absolutely times where they start installing the game plan for the next big opponent. Like I guarantee you Alabama did it with Chattanooga. They have stuff that they were working on offensively and defensively, and they're not going to tell the players, but that stuff is really based on Auburn, and it's probably, a lot of times even now, it's probably even based on Georgia. And they're just going to couch it as being Chattanooga stuff. So all that, and combined with the home field advantage, which has been a big thing for Auburn, does flip it Auburn's way. Now, again, I think that is explainable. 2019, there was an Alabama team that had third-string defensive linemen. Their run defense had completely collapsed at the end of the year. I think if they'd made the playoff, this is going to be a popular sentiment. Unless they'd gotten a lot healthier in 2019, they were gonna have some real issues. And a couple of years ago, Alabama's offensive tackle play was really poor. The right tackle, who's now at Florida and struggling in pass pro, played in that game. Auburn had two great edge rushers in Moultrie and Derek Hall, and they were in Alabama's backfield the entire time. And they'd seen that in the LSU game. It wasn't like a one-off thing. Alabama had struggled before with that particular problem. Auburn presented particular matchups. I could explain why Alabama struggled on the road. This one, I can't. This one, our model says it should be higher than 14 and a half. And that is a model that's probably pessimistic. This is one where I can point to an Auburn team that's had particular weaknesses that don't translate. I can say that Auburn has had a pretty good secondary. Now, they've been too banged up. Auburn's run defense and all, though, it's merely okay. I mean, Alabama has advantages passing and running the ball versus Auburn. I cannot necessarily see an angle where Alabama should necessarily struggle to the point to justify this being a particularly close game, other than the motivation factor, maybe the preparation factor, etc. So, Daniel, I'm going to go ahead and give my score, if that's okay. I mean, I see this game being, I'm going to say 34-17, and that's probably throwing in a garbage time touchdown. And maybe that in and of itself answers the spread, because 17 points there is only just over the mark to cover. And maybe the point here is that it doesn't feel like a game that Alabama is necessarily going to run away with 52-10 or something like the Tua era. But it doesn't feel like a particularly close game to me. It's a weird week. It was basically this or Oregon State. Oregon State just lost, and we've covered them enough, actually. On that side, we didn't want to do it again. So we ended up covering the Iron Bowl, which is a big game every year. We usually cover it. But it's just not a game that I realistically think Auburn can win, even though Vegas is actually saying that they feel like, a two-touchdown game is a relatively competitive game. And even despite everything I just said, I don't necessarily agree. I don't think Auburn's going to hold up that well.
So I think that it's tough because the Arkansas game sticks in my head. The fact that the Georgia game was tight sticks in my head. I think a couple things have happened, though. I think that Alabama really has found something offensively that has made Milroe a little more comfortable, and he's legitimately become a better passer in this comfort. I watched the highlights from the Chattanooga game. I don't recommend anybody watch too many of these FCS games just to watch them, but the highlights were on YouTube, and they're two deep balls that Milroe threw, I think both to Burton, where there's the initial play that they show, and then they can go back and revisit with a highlight, and it's one of the few times with these broadcasts where you can see the field. And it's a shot from behind, so you see the whole vertical field. In both deep throws, Milroe led his receiver from either the slot or the far hash across the field, and one was right to left and one was left to right. He led his receiver beautifully. So it was not just a deep ball. It was a deep ball that he walked a receiver into on the other side of the field, which is really a sign of maturation in his capabilities as a passer. But then combine the fact that he's running the ball. And I just think that the thing that was missing early in the season is there, and it's clicked. And I also think that Alabama is going to try to make a statement because they are not comfortably and objectively in if they beat Georgia, given what all else might happen with all the other Power 5 conference champions. So I think they're going to be pressing a little bit in a good way for Alabama to try to make a statement against a team that's not terrible but not great. Give me Alabama 42, Auburn 13. And I've been someone who's picked against Bama multiple times, I think, this year, multiple times in the last couple of years. Haven't been super high on them, have taken some heat from Bama fans on my comments on the offense. But I got Bama pretty big in this one. Tell me what you think about that.
I don't think it's crazy because I do think you're right. I think Alabama has a lot of reasons to try to put up a number here. And part of it is that offense needs to be continued to rev up as much as they can. I mean, they need as much momentum as they can build because I do think offenses are rhythm-based, and it's often about getting comfort levels in terms of having success in order to have continued success. Now, I do think Auburn's probably not getting enough credit as a secondary. I mean, you can run over Auburn for sure, which we've seen with New Mexico State a little bit. But in terms of overall pass defense, they're pretty darn good. I mean, they're 39th in our metric. The problem is their run defense is 76th. And Alabama is not a great running team. They've gotten much better and much more effective, but they're still probably merely good. Maybe they can get to very good. They're not going to be elite. I don't think that's going to happen. Much to the chagrin and expectations of an offensive line, I don't think it's going to happen. So there's a little bit of strength on strength defensively for Auburn, where I think their pass defense is good enough that they're not just going to get gouged deep unless they quit or unless the offensive line just totally starts winning the line of scrimmage to the extent that Auburn has to compromise themselves. It just all really comes down to the fact that Auburn's got to run the ball well and they got to stop the run. And I don't know that they can do that well. And if you can't do it that well, then one, you're going to give up points. But two, and maybe just as importantly to your point, this also could be a game where Auburn gives Alabama an inordinate amount of possessions. A lot like some of the Penn State games early this year, you look at the final score and it looks like Penn State won handily, but the reality a lot of times is the defense was so good, they would just get the ball back over and over and over and over and over. And so by the end of it, when you're playing like in Iowa and you get the ball back that much, one, the dam's going to break a couple times, but two, you just keep winning the field position battle until you're in great positions to score. And I do think there's something realistic there with this game too. My final point on this one in particular is that I'm still a little baffled by the spread. 14.5 feels too low. We model this higher. They just lost a game by 21 to a team that's definitely not as good as Alabama. Doesn't seem like they're trending in the right direction. And the only thing I can think of is that Vegas either feels like there's a matchup issue or a problem with Alabama that we haven't seen, or they feel like there's some combination of over-preparation and home field advantage that's going to come significantly into play. And that's the only explanation I've got, because this just feels like a game that should be destined for a blowout. But if you're an Auburn fan, maybe you can latch onto those red flags and say Vegas sees something other people don't. They believe in Auburn and home field advantage for Auburn. Seem to, in a realistic way. So maybe that's the avenue for success. But definitely a game that Alabama probably ought to win. And it's Hugh Freeze in year one, and I don't think it's necessarily over. And if they do lose big, I don't think that's a referendum on him, because it's true. We talked about this a lot in the Harsin era. Brian Harsin left that roster completely, totally depleted. Auburn fans, I don't think, had fully accepted how bad the situation was. I think they've begun to finally realize it. I think Hugh Freeze actually deserves a lot of credit for shoring up what would have been an even worse team through the transfer portal. Because if they didn't have those transfer offensive linemen and offensive tackles, this team would have been a lot worse. But now you're starting to see the limits of capable G5 level offensive tackles. These are not pro prospect type guys. They are not the size, speed, strength of normal SEC high caliber offensive tackles. They've been serviceable enough to make this team work, but not a whole lot more, and they've just kind of hit a wall. So It'll be interesting to see how it pans out one way or the other. Would be surprising to me if it's close, but it seems like Vegas thinks there's a good chance of that, so you never know. And it's been a year where anything could happen, right?
Yeah, and look, I've got a big number here, but I also would not be surprised if Alabama's offense does stutter because it did hit a groove against really bad defenses or bad defensive performances. So I've got a big number here, but look, 24-20 wouldn't totally shock me. Now, if Auburn wins this game, I would be really surprised. But a tighter game, a sub 10-point game wouldn't shock me at all. Anything else on this one?
Yeah, just to the last point, right? This Auburn defense is definitely better than Arkansas's defense. So if Alabama wants to show that they've consistently just been a total team, they need to keep this run going. And if they beat Auburn by a big number, it's gonna influence the way I view them going into the Georgia game, because it's just gonna, after the Kentucky game, which we said was a matchup problem, Chattanooga game, bad team, LSU, bad defense. Auburn has a lot of issues, but this is going to be a very motivated Auburn defense, and it's a better defense than, say, Arkansas. The kind of teams that, probably a better defense actually in a lot of ways than Ole Miss. And those were teams that Alabama struggled with offensively early in the year. So if they can put up 40-something points on them, that's going to tell me almost definitively it's just not the same offense it was in the first half of the year.
All right, y'all. Let us know in the comments what you think this score is going to be, and we will talk Bama, Georgia, regardless of whether Bama wins this or not next week, and we are going to do a live show. We've been wanting to do one this year. We put these on a hiatus for a bit, but we're going to get back into it with a live show. Championship weekend, don't know about what time, but we'll let y'all know. Thanks so much, y'all. Have a great week. Have a great Thanksgiving. God bless.